that's a crucial point that you make. Does J.D. Vance and Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, do they have the ability to make a decision on the basis of these negotiations, or do they still need to go back to Donald Trump to decide as to what happens? But the question is also this. This is not the first time that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are involved in negotiations with the Iranian side. This is the third time in the last 9 to 10 months that negotiations are underway. In the last two occasions, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were negotiating with the Iranians. It ended with the Americans stopping negotiations midway and then starting to bomb Iran. The Iranians say they do not trust the Americans. What do you expect could happen here? Could we again look at a case where the negotiations could break down and hostilities could resume again?
I wish I could tell you that I thought that was not a possible outcome. The United States has shown itself in these matters to be not reliable in any way, shape, or form. It's frankly pretty surprising to me that the Iranians would want to sit around any conference table with Witkoff and Kushner. Two officials, by the way, it's important to note, are not empowered to speak for the United States government. Only J.D. Vance is able to do that. Getting back to your first question, I think it's clear that Vance would not be there to make a deal, quote unquote, or reach an agreement all by himself. He would be checking back with the president if they can come up with some kind of agreed texts, which I think is what all we can really hope for in an agreement like this, in which the sort of a set of principles might get laid out, and then there would be follow-up meetings in which the United States then provides its subject matter experts to try to hammer out these sort of working level details on various of these issues. So I think it's a bit much to expect that there's going to be some kind of sweeping agreement, but we could get an agreement on principles that would provide the basis to move forward. And all we can do is all hope that that is what happens.
Right. Now, J.D. Vance is the vice president. He's also a 2003 Iraq war veteran. But Jared Kushner is the son-in-law of Donald Trump. Steve Witkoff is Donald Trump's golfing buddy, who's also a real estate developer who's said to have built a few shopping malls in New Jersey. The fact that these two individuals, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, have a very close proximity to Donald Trump's ear, in your assessment, do you think their advice will outweigh the advice that J.D. Vance would give to the American president? What do you think is the dynamic there?
Of course, you raised this interesting question about the inner circle, Trump's inner circle. And again, as indicated in press reports published in the New York Times about the decision-making process in the White House about going to war, this came from the Israeli prime minister and the head of Mossad. They convinced Trump to do this, and J.D. Vance was out of town, I think, interestingly, while this meeting happened. Because in the press reports, of course, Vance was one of the only administration officials who was acting, frankly, like an adult, who was asking the important questions about why we were doing this, how long would it go on, what could we expect to achieve. There were no other, at least according to the press reports, there were no other people in the president's immediate inner circle that were asking these questions. So Kushner and Witkoff, it seems to me, they're also known to be ardent Zionists, right? And again, here we are in the United States turning over various foreign policy functions to these ardent Zionists. And I understand there are reasons why people the administrations want to do this. But J.D. Vance is an America First sort of person, I think. If Kushner and Witkoff are really, they're representing Israel's interests to a certain extent. So all we can do, and a person like me, a citizen of the United States, hopes that J.D. Vance stands up for these principles in the negotiations and provides some actual, real adult supervision with an America First perspective. The United States needs to reach some kind of an agreement that can bring these hostilities to a close, to what has been an absolutely catastrophically disastrous war, and which I think, of course, President Trump finally realized when he declared that the Iranian proposal was the basis for, again, further talks on ending the war.
Right. You mentioned Israel and also the fact that it is the elephant that is not there in the room.
Yep.
How do you think Tel Aviv is looking at what is unfolded? Because Benjamin Netanyahu is a very interesting and an important stakeholder in this. He's been wanting a war with Iran for the last at least 3 decades from the statements that he has made every time that he's been visiting the United States of America, where he says that Iran is just 3 weeks away from a nuclear bomb. It's important to take that out. And the fact that the war hasn't gone exactly in the manner the Americans and the Israelis expected. What do you think is going on in the mind of Benjamin Netanyahu as he unfolds the manner in which the chips have fallen?
Well, I think it's important to understand here that Israel may be the only one of the 3 of the antagonists that's actually pursuing a coherent strategy. The Israeli strategy is to achieve its aims, its political aims of greater Israel, which involves, again, expanding its borders through the use of arms. It means ethnic cleansing of the areas of occupation. It means weakening all of the states around it so that they don't pose a military threat, and also provide Israel with a free fire zone, if you will, to continue blasting away its enemies. So this includes Iran, of course, unsurprisingly. And in your report here on the summary before the interview began, Benjamin Netanyahu said, as far as he's concerned, the war goes on, which is another way of saying Israel is continuing to pursue its aims and objectives that are related to the creation of greater Israel, and, of course, dragging the United States along behind it with its instrumental refusal to rein in Israeli behavior. So this influence that the Israelis have in Washington, of course, is greatly buttressed by the Israeli lobby. They have been pressuring President Trump and the members of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. I think it's important to note that while it's clear now in numerous reports that it was Israel that instigated this war and convinced the sitting American president to do this, that you've had no senior political leaders in either political party in the United States have stood up and commented about how outrageous this is from the American perspective. So, as I said, you have this sort of a bit of an asymmetry here, which Israel is continuing to march. They're continuing to blast away in Lebanon. They intend on annexing it. They're in the process of annexing the West Bank. They're carrying out their ethnic cleansing through military force and genocide against the Palestinians. So that continues uninterrupted. So the question that we all have to ask ourselves, of course, is there any prospect at all of a region free from military violence when you have a state like this, which again is intent on using military force to expand its borders, create this idea again of greater Israel, stealing land from the people who had it before? The list of things, of course, goes on.